All right. Good evening, guys. My name is Rich Aspenberg. I'm the pastor here at Mission Point, and this is Corey. And we just want to welcome you as you guys are getting in and getting situated. Thanks for coming. Just a couple of house things I want to let you guys know of. There is coffee out there in the cafe if you'd like a cup of coffee. Also, if you're new to this, being in this building, if you walk out these double doors and to the left, you'll see the bathrooms in case you needed that throughout the night. But we're just glad that you guys came, and let me pray for us as we start the night out, and then Corey, I'll let her give you guys more instructions and what's going to happen for the evening. So let's pray. God, we thank you for this time together. Lord, we thank you for the wisdom that you've given some of these men and the insights that they are seeing and are aware of what's going to be, what is being and what may be taught in our local schools. And so, Lord, as parents, as families, as people who care about our kids, I pray as we hear this information that you would give us wisdom, insight, and discernment on how to act on this information and what part that we need to take in some of these things and what to do. And so we ask that, God, you would lead us. Lord, we pray that we would be, as believers, shining light in our culture and in our community. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This event actually was inspired because I saw Sean and Pastor Jay speak a couple months back at the Ocean City Tabernacle, and I left there on fire. And not like on fire, like good, like on fire, let's take this place down. It was like crazy because did not realize everything that was happening. And so just the fact that you guys are here, it's an honor that we are able to invest in you. And kudos for not sitting back and letting these things happen to your kids and not knowing about it. One of the things when I left that night, I realized a lot of parents did not realize what was happening, and the ones that did had a disbelief that they couldn't do anything about it. And that's what I loved about Sean's presentation, is he was able to share all that knowledge with us. So tonight we're going to have two guest speakers. First one up is Mr. Sean Highland. I am going to read this because both of these men are so accredited, there was no way that I could memorize everything that they have done. Sean Highland serves as the Executive Director of Family Policy Alliance of New Jersey, a statewide public policy advocacy organization representing tens of thousands of New Jerseyans. He is responsible for leading and directing policy strategy, political strategy, and mobilization efforts in New Jersey. He is married with 4 children, and as you will plainly see, he is passionate about our kids and what is happening in their education. So I want to welcome him up. If you guys could give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Again, I want to just appreciate Mission Point Church for hosting this event. Pastor Rich, thank you for opening up your doors. It's great to be here down in Summers Point. How many different churches are here tonight? 3, 4, 5, possibly different people from different churches. Wonderful. This is great to have you guys come on out just to really hear what's going on in the public school system, and then ultimately have some action steps on what you can do to address some of these issues. What I'm going to share with you tonight, it's not like a biblical sermon on sexuality. It's not the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's just simply a transfer of information on what's happening in public schools. So you're more aware of what's going on in the elementary, the middle school, and the high schools here in New Jersey, and hopefully what you can do about the situation. Amen? So again, as we engage in this topic, it's always very sensitive. We want to do it in a spirit of love, and at the same time speak the truth so we can understand what's really going on and not be left out in the dark and have a good grasp and a good snapshot of what's happening with our kids. So let's jump into this. How about maybe 20, 25 minutes I'll share with you. Pastor Jay will come up and share with you what he has done in Ocean City after hearing this information. We'll do some Q&A at the end. So let's kind of jump into this right here. Next slide here. Dr. Albert Mohler, he's the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He says this: if you control the curriculum, if you control the education system, if you control the schools, you eventually control the direction of the culture. I want to pause right there, because as we go through this presentation, we want to keep in mind the end game of all of this content and indoctrination. It is to control the culture in the next generation. It's not by chance. It's not by circumstance. There is a plan and purpose of why they're teaching this information. It's to control the culture. Next slide. So there's really 4 problems in New Jersey public schools. Again, I want to pause here for a moment because there's so much misinformation that's out there. People kind of lump it all together as LGBT curriculum, and it's really 4 separate situations in the schools. We have to understand where we're coming from because some are laws sent down by the legislature, some are just simply learning standards developed by the Department of Education, and some are just simply books that have been existing for years, but more prominent now as we're beginning more attention to what's happening in public schools. So the first column, the LGBT curriculum, we'll look at it in detail in a moment, but let's look at the overall picture here. The first column, the LGBTQ curriculum, that's the law, meaning the legislature passed it about 2 years ago. It should have started in most school districts this last school year, and that's really about contributions per se. But when you begin to look at some of the lessons we'll see tonight, if they adopt certain lessons by certain organizations, it goes much more than just contributions. It really is an agenda of a new sexual ethic and ideology in the classroom. But that is a law, and there is no opt-out of it because it was not limited to health class. It's supposed to be wherever appropriate. Again, at the end of the discussion tonight, we're going to encourage you to urge your school district to minimize the impact of this law and try to put it in health class, or at least as least subject as possible. But the law allows it to be where appropriate or really wherever. The second part is the diversity lessons that started this current school year that would now mandate like transgender identity lessons, sexual orientation lessons beginning in kindergarten. And again, originally when it was drafted, it was for a health class where there would be an opt-out of the information. It was amended and changed in committee to put it wherever appropriate, meaning in multiple subjects, making it difficult to opt out of. And we'll give a sample lesson tonight as well as that. Then there's a new sex ed learning standards, not a law, simply a learning standard sent down by the DOE in Trenton, could be easily reversed by another State Board of Ed meeting. Once a year they have that in Trenton to approve learning standards, so it could be changed in the future. It's not a hard law that's difficult to change, but they need to hear from parents across the state. And then simply language arts books, again, novels, fiction books, very sexually themed characters and content. Again, we'll take a snapshot of that as well tonight. Really 4 different issues here. If it's in health class, you can opt out, like sex ed. If it's not in health class, then there's no opt-out provided if it's information, but you can minimize it by urging your school district to do the least amount possible to fulfill the law. Next slide. So the LGBTQ curriculum, again, the contributions curriculum by definition, but it could go much more above, just beyond that. Next slide. Here's a sample of information that Garden State Equality, which is the leading LGBTQ advocacy organization, that's how they define themselves here in the state of New Jersey. This is cut and paste of some of the language they gave parents at a back-to-school night when they were trying to explain to the parents the pilot program that their children were going through in middle school. So according to Garden State Equality, children will learn under the contributions law to develop a toolkit to dismantle and confront the patriarchy, hypermasculinity, and homophobia. And when we see these words and how we would understand these words by the classical definition is probably different than how they define these words. So when they say the patriarchy, in kind of like left-wing ideology, it's out there now, they don't mean male leadership in society. They mean the very idea that there's any differences between males and females. They believe in a genderless society. So any type of difference between a male and a female in their mind has been set up for males to oppress females. And so therefore, they want to take away the idea that males and females are different in any way or in any capacity for a genderless society. The very idea of a binary biological gender, in their term, is oppressive and harmful. Then there's hypermasculinity, which is the idea of a strong male. So if you were to even Google sometimes examples of hypermasculinity, you'll see like Sylvester Stallone or Clint Eastwood or Robert De Niro or Chuck Norris. Of course, you can't leave Chuck Norris out. Chuck Norris. They want to take away the idea of a strong man in society. And then homophobia, well, they're not thinking the idea of being afraid or intolerant or hateful towards someone who has same-sex attraction. To them, homophobia is the very concept that the biblical nuclear family, as created out of the mind of God, male and female, as he created them, the biblical nuclear family, if you think that's what's good for society, that's homophobic. So in the end, they're trying to train middle school students to confront and dismantle the biblical family under contributions. So it extends much more than just history lessons as the media portrays it in their own language. Then they want students to connect and consider intersectionality. Again, a political theory of oppression from one group oppressing another group. Don't have time to dive deep into that tonight, but it goes above and beyond contributions. Students will learn to use inclusive language and transgender pronouns. We understand what that is. And world languages will have lessons to critique the gender lexicon and make it more inclusive. For example, like Spanish, in their teaching, in their worldview now, Spanish, Italian, other type of romantic languages that have their nouns ending in A and O for feminine or masculine nouns, the very idea of feminine and masculine nouns reinforces the binary genders. And so therefore, it's oppressive and harmful. So they have lessons under contributions to reteach Spanish by taking out the masculine and feminine gender lexicon, everything ending now in E or in X, to take away the idea of a binary world, a male, female, masculine, feminine world, even down to foreign languages. So it's much more than the media would portray as simply history. If the school district would adopt these type of lessons from Garden State Equality, you can urge them to minimize these lessons by only teaching history, maybe one lesson once a year to fulfill the law, but not saturate the curriculum with a postmodern sexual belief system being imposed upon students. Next slide. Okay, sexual orientation, gender identity, diversity lessons, starting in kindergarten this current school year. Next slide. Here's a little sample on the very bottom from Advocates for Youth, the bottom right corner. This again is like the leading national LGBTQ organization dealing with education, lessons, curriculum at the nationwide level. They're very, very influential here in New Jersey. They testify when it comes to our learning standards in Trenton. They have a lot of influence behind the scenes at the Department of Education in Trenton among the employees and the executives who work there. This is a sample lesson, literally a sample lesson that I've copied and pasted, and you can go advocatesforyouth.com, click on resources, go to curriculum, go to kindergarten, find the lessons. This is not hidden information. This is how they teach transgender identity starting in kindergarten. Tell students that there are some body parts that mostly just girls have and some body parts that mostly just boys have. And again, they are very specific to kindergartners. Most girls have a vulva, most boys have a penis. This is kindergarten lessons. Why in the world are we teaching, our anatomy, our reproductive anatomy to kindergartners at 5 years old? Again, only complicating and confusing their understanding of human sexuality. Most girls, but not all. Most boys, but not all. Because you could have this anatomy, but yet not be that gender. But they're teaching 5-year-olds in kindergarten. Again, if they were to adopt a lesson like this, maybe your school district will have something not as extreme as this. I'm not saying this is happening in your school district. I'm saying this is an actual kindergarten lesson on diversity developed by one of the leading educational LGBT advocacy organizations in America, Advocates for Youth, that have a lot of influence behind the scenes. What I mean by influence, when these new sex ed learning standards I talked to you about in a minute, when they were first discussed or debated in Trenton about whether they're going to be approved, 900 parents spoke out against this type of ideology and information in the classroom. 900 parents spoke out against. Then about 4 or 5 people, Planned Parenthood, Advocates for Youth, Garden State Equality, spoke out in favor of this. 2 months later, they proposed the learning standards. Guess who won the argument? Advocates for Youth, Garden State Equality, Planned Parenthood, not the 900 parents. That's what I mean by influence in Trenton. So again, at 5 years old, they become aware, keep that in mind, aware of transgender ideology, sexual orientation, and later on they become allies of that. Next slide. Here's next slide. Here's the guidelines for transgender students in school, beginning in kindergarten up through high school. To save time, we'll just read the underlined sections. Parental consent is not required for the school district to accept the student's asserted gender identity. Further, a student need not meet any threshold diagnosis or treatment. In other words, they self-diagnose themselves. A 7-year-old walks into the school, self-diagnosis as being born in the wrong body, want to be referred to as a different gender, the school must now respect that 7-year-old's wish to be a different gender, and that school need not tell the parent it's even happening. There is no affirmative duty for any school district personnel to notify a student's parent or guardian of the student's gender identity or expression. I know parents who, well, I know a substitute teacher who their first grade child up in Patterson was a boy who would use the girls' bathroom every day, identifying as a girl, but he was a biological boy. He was 6 years old. And this substitute teacher, a Christian teacher, was grieved by this because she couldn't tell the mom when she would drop the child off in the morning or she would lose her job. Imagine being part of a system or an institution that by law is set up to deceive the parents. And that's what's going on according to our guidelines. Next slide. If the parent would object to the child's chosen gender identity, chosen pronoun, the school district should consult their board attorney regarding the minor student's civil rights and protections under the New Jersey law against discrimination, and then drop down the bottom paragraph. School districts should be mindful of disputes between minor students and parents concerning the student's gender identity or expression. Many support resources are available from the New Jersey Department of Children and Families and New Jersey Department of Education's Child Abuse, Neglect, and Missing Children webpage. Meaning if you're objecting to your 9-year-old changing their gender and you find out about it and you go into the school and say, listen, I don't want you to, affirm my child's gender dysphoria. My child was born a boy. He is a boy. We're going to love him. We're going to care for him. We're going to see him go out of this. We're going to coach him. We're going to embrace him. We're not going to affirm that. They're going to say, well, thank you for sharing your concerns, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Here's our page on child abuse and neglect. Really, in a sense, threatening the parent, shaming the parent, putting guilt on the parent for not affirming this new sexual ideology in the classroom, all the while trying to keep the parent uninformed of what's going on. But if for some reason you come across the information and realize it, then the school is going to try to pressure you to affirm it or be pushed towards going to the child abuse and neglect webpage. Again, this is not a law. This is a learning standard or a guideline, I should say, sent down by the state DOE, Department of Education. If we had a different DOE, different people in charge at the Department of Education, this could change one day. But as it stands right now, this is the guideline that every school district must fulfill because school board members take a code of conduct and an oath to uphold the laws and the guidelines of the state. So you can urge them to push back against the state, but they're going to need you to really support them because they're going to take heat from the state to fulfill these type of guidelines. Next slide. Okay, the sex-ed learning standards in health class. Let's go to the next slide. There is an opt-out for this. You can see in 5th grade, it's a big focus on transgenderism and the gender identity. In middle school now, they're going to teach 13-year-olds about anal and oral and vaginal sex. 13-year-olds, now, if they were to teach that today in high school, it's unacceptable. They're not allowed in high school right now. These learning standards were not lowered from high school to middle school. They don't even exist in high school right now. But all of a sudden, they're going to be implemented and injected into the middle school classroom. And when the DOE in Trenton was trying to take the concerns of parents into consideration about teaching this type of sexual acts in the classroom, they were told, at least what I've been told, so I wasn't there in the room, so technically it's not firsthand information, but what I've been told is that they were threatened by a lawsuit because if you only teach reproduction or natural intercourse, that's discrimination. Because there are other people in that classroom who don't practice natural intercourse, so therefore you have to teach everything or you're discriminating. And so they kind of subject everyone to this information, but again, at a very, inappropriate age level that most of us don't want our kids discussing this. If they are, we want to be able to teach them a certain biblical view on stuff like this instead of having it done into the classroom. Next slide. These are the 12th grade learning standards for health class. Advocate for school and community policies and programs that promote dignity and respect for people of all genders, gender expressions, gender identities, and sexual orientations. Analyze current social issues affecting perceptions of sexuality, culture, ethnicity, disability status, and make recommendations to address those issues. So you can see how they're in kindergarten, they become aware of transgenderism. When they become in middle school, they become allies of the transgender ideology. By the time they leave high school, they become activists to analyze and address issues in society affecting transgenderism and sexual orientation. Really, again, what was the end game that we discussed in the quote from Dr. Albert Mohler? It is eventually to control the culture. So they're raising up activists, making them aware, making them allies, and making them activists to do what? To confront and dismantle the biblical family, the nuclear family. If you go to a lot of left-wing websites, you'll see a lot of left-wing organizations. I don't mean this the LGBTQ, or I mean this the socialist websites in America. All of them have on there their demand to dismantle the nuclear family and to end the state recognition of the gender binary. This is literally what they say on every single website. Even those that are supposed to be dedicated to economic theory, they all go after the gender binary and the nuclear family. So it's widespread in left-wing ideology to become activists. Next slide. Here are the groups that are behind the sex ed learning standards, ones I was saying testifying in Trenton. This is their website, sexednj.org, top left-hand corner, sexednj.org. It's their website. Nothing graphic. They would never show you anything graphic. Simply very clean, crisp, corporate type of website, kind of showing who they are, what they're standing for, what they're working for behind the scenes to have New Jersey live up to the gold standard of sex ed education in their mind and how they would perceive it to be. And what they have said that the new sex ed learning standards that were adopted, I just shared with you, they're in support of them because they remove language that relied on the gender binary, which was stigmatizing and shaming. So if we believe as the body of Christ that male and female is how we created the world, the heavens and the earth, male and female, everything else, the gender binary of God's creative order out of his own mind for the flourishing of society, that very idea to them is shaming and stigmatizing and needs to be removed from society. Now, you and I wouldn't allow that to happen, but they're raising up a new generation who are being trained to dismantle and confront that idea in the public school system. So go on that website, sexednj.org, and you can learn more information about those learning standards. Next slide. Language arts. I'm going to give you a couple books as samples. This is not an exhaustive, comprehensive list. This is going to give you an idea of what's out there. Again, this is not necessarily required reading. Some is recommended reading, but it's accessible. It's accessible to many school libraries, which is just as troubling for the fact that it's there to begin with. Next slide. Here's two books. One is named George. One's named Genderqueer. You may have heard of Genderqueer on national news stories recently. But the book George was the most challenged book in America 3 years in a row. And it was recommended reading for fifth graders in some school districts here in New Jersey. It may not be your school district, but I know some parents have called us. This book, parents object to it so much. One, it's about a 12-year-old transgender boy who thinks he's a girl, trying on girls' underwear, looking at himself in the bathtub, going to his friend's house who is a girl, and her telling him, no, you really are a girl just like me. Your parents just don't understand people like you. So at the end of the whole narrative, who's the hero? The transgender boy coming out. Who's the villain in the narrative? The parents. So it's the narrative of how it's written, where the parent is the bad guy and the transgender person coming out is the good one. So as you read that book, you find yourself wanting to align against parental authority, against a biblical conservative worldview when it comes to sex and gender, and for affirming and promoting transgender ideology. Now, Genderqueer is a very, very graphic book when it comes to transgenderism. And when I mean graphic, I really, in good conscience, I could never show you the pictures that are in that book. I'm not saying stick figures, okay? I'm not saying leaving anything to the imagination. I'm not saying describing certain sexual acts. I'm talking about graphic, clear, pornographic illustrations of various sexual acts by transgender individuals in the book. And so I just want to, whether you want to look at it or not, you need to do that on your own time. I could never take a church pulpit and actually show those images from where we worship God on a Sunday morning. But it's very, very troubling information. That's why you hear so much about it on the national news story. Well, there have been book committees, I know at least one or two in New Jersey, volunteer parents at the local school level who review books in the public school library. And this book committee, I know up in Hunterdon County, at least one of them, voted 7-2 to remove this book from the public school library. The school board refused their request to remove the book, keeping it accessible to the students. Because if one book gets removed, there's a whole lot of books that got to go as well, that violate these same obscene standards of pornographic material in the public school. Next slide. Here's a book called Fun Home. This is a quote from the author, Alison Betchell, on a podcast. The author says this about her own book. It's all about the power of images, which I think is something people need to talk about. I can understand why people wouldn't want their children to accidentally think this was a funny comic book and pick it up and see pictures of people having sex. I can understand that. I think banning books is the wrong approach. If you don't want your kids to read it, make sure they don't get a hold of it. But I do understand that concern because, yeah, drawings are very seductive and attention-catching. And again, very graphic illustrations of lesbian oral sex in this book. And it was required reading in some New Jersey school districts. Parents mobilized, parents protested, parents had a lawsuit. It became recommended reading, one of 3 books to choose from, up in Watchung Hills, New Jersey. Again, this is accessible in a lot of libraries, but this specific school district, it was required reading, then recommended reading. A second lawsuit brought against the Department of Education here in the state of New Jersey to remove this book from the Watchung Hills School District. And after so many months, the judge finally decided, well, you brought the lawsuit too late. The book has to stay on a technicality, not taking it out of the public school system. Next slide. Here's a book called, this is the title of the book, This Book is Gay. This is also voted, along with genderqueer I mentioned, to be removed from the school district, and the school board rejected the parents' request. It's a parental committee of volunteers who are tasked the assignment of looking at books and voting yea or nay on books for the public school library. And yet even this official committee for the school board was rejected by those who are school board members to remove it along with genderqueer. Here's one little paragraph in the book, again, shaming the Christian church for our view of sexuality in the chapter, Haters Gonna Hate. Check out the same-sex culture of the Greeks and the Romans. I'm afraid the tide turned when Christian missionaries took it upon themselves to travel the world to tell everyone how marriage should be done. From there, it was downhill all the way as far as the acceptance of homosexuality was concerned, and it goes on to blame the church for bringing forth the biblical sexuality in Western civilization that now they're trying to dismantle to take away the shame and the stigma of how God created us in the book of Genesis. It's scary stuff. And this book, my friend, the biggest problem in this book is not just how they shame Christianity, not the fact that it's about the LGBTQ community. This book is a very graphic sex manual. And again, I mean very graphic. I mean stuff when I read, I'm like, what in the world? This is like totally inappropriate. I mean, at so many levels. Again, I'm only sharing this with you, not to obviously be a stumbling block in any way, but to kind of bring light and expose what's being done in darkness behind our backs. I mean, a very graphic manual on some very graphic things that it was just so obscene that this I wouldn't even recommend reading. I was like, this is absolutely sinful material. It's even for married individuals. And yet, there it is in public schools, accessible to so many young high school students, not elementary, but high school students. So finally, next slide. What can we do about it? Here's our call to action here. Next. Well, here's some rights you have in education. One, according to federal law, you have the right to review curriculum, including getting a copy from school boards of the homework and reading assignments. So you should go down first to the teacher. That doesn't work, go to the principal. That doesn't work, go to the school board. Say, I want to review the curriculum that is going to be used to teach these learning standards or to fulfill these laws. They can see curriculum for a lot of other stuff too, math, science, everything else, but it's a lot of stuff you need to go through. But you want to be very clear with them to save yourself time, maybe them time. What are you doing to fulfill these learning standards and these laws? I want to review the curriculum. You also have the right to look at all the lesson plans so you know when that lesson's going to be taught. So if you know it's Thursday in English class, they're going to be discussing this novel, or Thursday in science class, they're going to be discussing this sexual identity, then I want to know, so when my child comes home on Thursday, I'm going to deconstruct what they just learned with a biblical worldview. So you have a heads up on what's going on in the local school day to day by looking at the lesson plan. And then 3, you have the right to actually observe classroom activities. You have the right to observe classroom activities. Now, it's not going to be easy to get in the classroom. I'm just going to tell you that right off the bat. But you do have the right. So listen, I'm very troubled by this lesson. I don't agree with this lesson. You tell me my child can't opt out of this lesson, well, then I want to be in the classroom when you teach this lesson. Now, granted, if you got an 8-year-old, 7-year-old, that might work. If you got a 15-year-old, I'm not sure how they're going to feel about it, you being in the class. But you have the right to do that. I'm just giving you what your rights are. So you know that you can't allow them to push you out of the equation. You have the right to be involved in the education of your child. So please look at the lessons, look at the lesson plans, and inject yourself into the conversation. Make sure the teacher and the principal knows that you're aware and you're involved. And again, we're not trying to, blame good, public school teachers that are doing the best they can. We're trying to do the best they can, but they're also under mandates. And so maybe they want you to be involved so they can feel better knowing you are involved. So begin the conversation and speak to your teacher and eventually your principal and your school board. Next, some stuff that we're working on with the Family Policy Alliance with legislators is called the Transparency in Education Act. It was developed by the Heritage Foundation, a very national conservative think tank. About, I think, 13 or 14 states have already introduced it in this current session. I'm meeting with legislators this Thursday. Hopefully they'll sponsor and introduce this. This will really clarify and give you more states' rights to make curriculum more transparent here in New Jersey and have parents more involved in the process. And so it's going to be a heavy lift in New Jersey to actually pass something like this, but there are legislators, maybe not the majority, but there are legislators who are on your side, who are really speaking up for you at the state level. And I want to encourage you as we begin to send out action alerts about this legislation, about this bill, that you to contact your legislator to encourage them to support this bill. Then there's a Parents' Bill of Rights that's been introduced in some states as well, similar yet different, but again, it kind of putting in codified law certain rights that parents have in educating their child according to their beliefs and according to how they want to raise them morally. So there is some stuff that we're working on at the state level, but at the end of the day, at the local level, it's up to you to really mobilize and engage the local school board to make your voices be heard. And the 2 books for fast you can download, 2 slides and I'm done here. One, familypolicyalliance.com/back to school for parents. This is a good national booklet, 124 pages, full color. It shows you what's going on across the nation when it comes to public school curriculum. Again, there's no cost to this booklet. You could download it online. You can see what's going on in California, in Texas, in Illinois, in New Jersey, around the nation on what's happening. Unfortunately, New Jersey is looked at across the nation as a problem state. So other states can see what's going on here and try to stop it where they live. But you can do a side-by-side comparison. And then finally, the last slide, genderresourceguide.com. This is, again, a free booklet from Family Policy Alliance, Focus on the Family, a few others, to help you engage in dialogue about transgender identity with your students, have that conversation, understand the terms, the definitions, and even the statistics and the research on what's harmful when it comes to gender-affirming care, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, sex reassignment surgery, and all this type of stuff. It gives you good data, good bullet points to have the conversations with your children. So thank you guys so much. We'll do Q&A in a minute, but we're going to bring Corey up and introduce our next speaker. God bless you.
So I have some good news for you guys. I see some of you taking pictures and videoing. I had a couple of parents contact me that were on vacation, and they really wanted to hear this information, so our good friend Josh back there is actually recording this. And we will be posting it so that way you can share it with your friends who weren't able to come out tonight. I didn't want to tell people that so that way it didn't encourage them to come tonight, but we will be recording it. Next up, we have Pastor Jay Reimer. He is right here across the bridge at the Ocean City Tabernacle. He is the president and pastor of Ocean City Tabernacle. He is married with 2 children. He has served for more than 25 years in leadership roles in higher education mission organizations, including Cairn University. Pastor Reimer has boldly led, and I watch him do this, boldly led the charge at the Ocean City Board of Education, and he is here to give us a few tips on what we could do for our own Board of Education. Can you guys welcome him for me?
Thank you, Corey. I've really come to respect Corey a lot and had a lot of respect for Rich as well in this church. My wife and I worshiped here a couple times, and we recommend people over here all the time. So thanks for your ministry here. And I also know Josh back there and Dakota as well. So you guys are blessed here. Yeah, so I'm just a guy who was in this session when Sean led it, what he just shared with you back in, I think it was September. And God used Sean to ignite something in me. I couldn't stop once I heard what he said, and I thought, okay, I'm going down this road, Lord. So if you'd start the slides, please. Basically, I've been teaching Acts to men's Bible study Monday mornings for some months, and these are some verses in there that just basically challenged me to go with this, because there's the Romans 13:1 that basically says submit to governments, but then you think there's things like abortion, and I'll be out there marching, picketing abortion. And so this one, when you get to it, and Peter and John replied, I'm just looking at what's in the bold, which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you, these leaders, or to him. You be the judges. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we've seen and heard, what we know the scriptures tell us to be doing and what we need to be believing. And then in Acts 5, the last bold line there at the end, Peter and the other apostles replied, we must obey God rather than human beings. And I tell you that because as you go down this road, if you choose to do what I've done and challenge your local school board, you're going to be told, as I was, by some Christians on the school board even, I signed something vowing that I would follow the Constitution of the state of New Jersey and adhere to the direction of the governor. And so I have to do that. That's what I was told. That's what they're told. In fact, the leader of that school board over there had been the leader up until January 1st, and he'd been a leader for some years. And he basically told the other school board members, you're not to speak in these meetings. When people give comments or they ask questions, you're not to speak. I'll speak representing the school board because there's legal liability in what might be said, and I have the background to say what needs to be said in response, if anything, so you're not to speak. In fact, they all have email addresses on the school district website, and they've been told they're not to respond to emails from parents or community members because they're not to represent the school district or the school board. And so my question is, people on the school board, why are you even on it at that point? So the next slide, please. This is the premise that I've tried to approach them with, that I've tried to go on social media with. It basically says parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing and education of their children. It seems like common sense, right? Well, I posted that on a social media page over in Ocean City now. We have a social media page that you could join if you wanted to, OCNJ School Discussion 2021-22. It has something like 700 people on it now. And unfortunately, there's included in those some people that feel strongly the other direction. And so if you have that next slide up, please. This is what was in response. And you may be able to see it, but I'll read it for you. It came from up above. It was from a source. The source was Occupy Democrats. So that tells you it's going to be an opposite view. And it says up there at the top, on the top of the school building, the public school is the best defense of a democratic nation. So you can everybody in the back there, can you read that yourself? Or do I need to read it? Is it too small? Okay, I think everybody can see that. So that's the why. But that really helped me to see that, because then I realized I'm coming at it from the approach that parents should have the authority over the upbringing and education of their children. These other people are coming from a whole different approach as far as the purpose of public education. And that takes them a whole different direction than we would go with it, because they have a whole different why, a whole different purpose. So that was, even though I read that and I was in shock, it was very helpful for me to have understanding. So then I'm going to take you down the road, because when I went to Ocean City and I took a document that had actually been given to us by Family Policy Alliance, a letter for people to sign, and we took a pile of them, these letters that people had signed, basically challenging, because of the laws that had been passed, what would be taught in the schools. And the school board basically told us, well, these laws are one thing, but really what happens is from the laws, it goes to the State Board of Education, and they implement these student learning standards that then come to the local school districts as required to implement in their curriculum. And so I went to the student learning standards, and these are on the state level. If you go to the next slide, please. And so I know this would be hard for you to read, but this is just in the section called Social and Sexual Health. Now, Back in our day, in my day, it may have been called sex ed. Now they bring the social into it because it's a lot of how we're treating one another, at least, some of these categories. So social and sexual health. So this is taught by second grade. So this is for what, like 5, 6, 7-year-olds? And what I refer to it as is gender identity confusion, because I think that's the purpose of what is going on here from the earliest ages. Now, they would deny that, meaning teachers, educators would deny that. And I'm all about what they're trying to do and making sure that nobody's discriminated against, that the students who are different from the majority or, from the heterosexuals, let's say, are accepted, that they're not bullied. I'm all for all that. It's all about welcoming anybody into our churches, loving them like God loves them, and welcoming into wherever they are. But at the same time, for me, it goes back to parental authority. I'm not okay with you teaching, like my nephew and niece went through the Ocean City schools. I'm not okay with you teaching our kids these things because they're imposing on values and morals, and that's my point. Leave religion out of it even, because the school board, once you use the word religion, they took minutes on what I said, and they used the word religion, and then everybody was like, oh, separation of church and state, and they just write you off. Keep the word religion out of it, but it's about values and morals. And so you get to that morality or immorality, but you get to that, and so you see, discuss the range of ways people express their gender and how gender role stereotypes may limit behavior. So from those earliest ages doing that, keep going to the next slide, please. And then by fifth grade, so this would be ages 8, 9, and 10, describe gender role stereotypes and their potential impact on self and others. I mean, I sure wasn't thinking about that stuff at that age, but they're trying to get in and try to cause questioning so later people are more open and accepting of alternatives. Differentiate between sexual orientation and gender identity. Demonstrate ways to promote dignity and respect for all people. Sexual orientation, gender identity expression, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, deferring ability, immigration status, family configuration. So throwing a lot of things in there. And that's the one I have to look and say, sure, I want to promote dignity and respect for all people. So let's go to the next one by 8th grade. So this is by age 13. So this would be ages like 11, 12, and 13. That during those ages, and I'll just read the circled ones, the expectation is that these students will be able to analyze the similarities and differences between friendships, romantic relationships, and relationships. Okay. And then also, the next line, and we're going to get down to one of the ones that Sean mentioned here in a moment, which is just so controversial. Identify factors that are important in deciding whether and when to engage in sexual behavior. So would you want your 11, 12, 13-year-old to be taught that by somebody who's not you, who's not the parent, somebody who's got totally different views than you would have, most likely? Okay, so then, let's see. This is it. No, it's the next one. Identify factors that can affect the ability to give or perceive consent to sexual activity, like body image, self-esteem, alcohol, other substances. This is just mind-boggling to me. And then define vaginal, oral, and anal sex. And I apologize to the youngsters and the females in here. My dad brought me up not to even speak about that stuff in public. So I really apologize. In the school board meeting, they had a couple high school students in there. I had to apologize to them. I was embarrassed about even mentioning those terms. But yet, the superintendent held a forum, and he invited, parents to come. And it was in response to my request that parents would be told the status of implementing these things. And he got to that one, and he said, we're not going to describe vaginal, oral, and anal sex. The teachers are only required to define it. And a young father in the audience, I was so proud of him, he goes to a good church, I know the guy, and he raises his hand. He interrupts the superintendent, and he says, sir, how are you going to define that without describing it? Do me a favor, just tell me the words. And the superintendent couldn't really respond, and then he went on, and I'm sorry, just give me the words. What would you say to define that without describing it? And, it became clear that that's ridiculous. So that's not the worst part of that, believe it or not. The worst part of that is the next standard there that just makes me cry. Okay, so here's the other thing. I met with the superintendent last week, finally got to that point, And he said the same thing he said at that superintendent's forum that night when asked about this. He said, that's because we want these children to know when they're inappropriately touched so that they know that's wrong and they don't allow that to happen. And one parent said, well, that's being taught all the way back at kindergarten, the no touch, and all that, being touched wrongly. And then another parent says, sir, don't you think by age 13 it's a little late for that? And so, it just blew me away because the next line gets deeper into that. It's not about that because the very next line says, identify short and long-term contraception and safer sex methods that are effective and describe how to access and use them, abstinence condom, for those vaginal, oral, and anal sex. If you go in the teacher training slides to the link that's there for teachers to look at, it also teaches them how to use something called a bridge gate in their mouth. That's something I never even heard of before. But the teachers are being trained on that stuff. It's just inconceivable. So I said to the superintendent, so if this is to help them to avoid being touched inappropriately by a pedophile, why are we teaching them how to use contraceptives for that? Are they supposed to say, pedophile, would you wait a minute while we do this and get protected? How ridiculous is that? It just makes me so angry. And they just to have responses like that rather than dealing with the issues. Okay, next one, please. Taught by 12th grade, so this would be like ages 14, 15, 16, 17. And there's not, well, on that top line, analyze the influences of peers, family, media, and social norms and culture on the expression of gender, sexual orientation, identity. So just still, questioning it more. But by high school in Ocean City now, they have clubs. I think they may call it the Rainbow Club or something like that, where this club was allowed last year to sell buttons as a fundraiser with people's preferred pronoun on them that they'd be wearing around the school. So if you go lower there, a couple boxes down, let's see. Yeah, here we go. Down the next box, the third one down, analyze the benefits of abstinence from sexual activity using reliable resources. And so that's finally, abstinence is supposed to be a focus. They say it is, but now from reliable resources, I'm sure they're not including the Bible in that. But then it says analyze factors. This is right after that influence the choices and effectiveness of safer sex methods and contraception, including risk reduction and risk elimination strategies. Hello, I thought you were just talking about abstinence. Why are you going there? And then the next line, describe the human sexual responses cycle, including the role of hormones and pleasure. Do you want some stranger teaching your kids that? I know I don't. Those books that Sean mentioned, I heard it said that if you had those books sitting in your workplace, on your desk, open to any of those pages, you would be fired. If you yourself went to offer them to a child of these ages, you'd be arrested. Wow. All right, let's go on to the next slide, please. I'm sorry, it gets me so passionate. Now, Josh, are you able to show that other, or is that yeah, you got it in there now. Okay, so I'm going to show the first three slides here. There's actually a link up at the top there. I have a friend who's a teacher. This friend is a Christian, very strong Christian, said, I want to show you these slides, that they're requiring teachers who want to teach in the Ocean City school system to go through this training online. So it says right up top there, Ocean City Public School District, teacher training. And it's basically now viewing transgender and gender nonconforming awareness in school. So it says biological sex refers to our biological and physical anatomy. Biological sex is used to assign gender at birth. Unlike biological sex, which is assigned at birth and based on physical characteristics, gender identity refers to a person's innate, deeply felt sense of being male or female, sometimes even both or neither. That's how the teachers are being trained, indoctrinated. And guess what? These aren't just high school teachers. These are any teacher of any age in the Ocean City Public School District that we're paying our tax dollars for. And don't get me wrong, like Sean said, most of the teachers are great. I have a lot of friends there that are teachers. They're great. But this is what the indoctrination is for them to have their job. While it's most common for a person's gender identity to align with their biological sex, it's not always the case. person's gender identity can be different from their biological sex because gender identity is internal and not always visible to others. It's something determined by the individual alone. Next slide, please. There's an inclination to equate the two, but gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same. Sexual orientation describes a person's sexual or romantic attraction, while gender identity refers to someone's own personal sense of being male, female, both, or neither. Everyone has both a gender identity and a sexual orientation. Did you know that? And that's what these people are being trained to teach your kids, my kids. And then slide 30 on that one, please. So at the end of this training, there's a test, a quiz you have to take if you're a teacher, and you get marked right or wrong. So most of us in this room, on this one where it says sex assigned at birth and gender identity are one and the same, most of us, if we're going by a biblical standard, will probably answer that true. Well, guess what? That's marked wrong. The correct answer is B. So if you believe that, you've just been told you're wrong. And you're trying to be there as a Christian teacher. So I'm thinking, okay, who's being discriminated against here? If I was an employee there, I'd feel totally discriminated against if they're telling me that's wrong. And then the slide 32, please, the last one. Another one that's an exam. This one is the most concerning one in the whole presentation to me. It alludes to what Sean's talking about. And this is an exam. Teachers of every grade have to go through this and then take this quiz at the end. And at first, this question, this statement seems pretty simple, and you think that's not a big deal. A transgender or gender nonconforming student should be addressed by the pronoun and name of the student's choosing. So these are all minors. Almost every student there is going to be less than 18. Who's missing from that equation? From that discussion that a parent is having with a student? The parent, obviously, right? There's no parental authority in that. And in fact, as Sean mentioned, and I confirmed this with a curriculum director in the Ocean City School District, if a parent tries to insert themselves in this and force themselves in this, they say it hasn't happened there yet according to them. The superintendent told me, well, if it's to this extreme, the parent, most likely knows about it. It'd be very rare they wouldn't know about it. And I'm like, but that's not what it says. It says black and white, basically, that it's only between the student and the teacher. And the law actually says if a parent forces himself to be inserted in there, they're considered a parental child abuser. How did we get to this point? So I'm going to go quicker now. I'll share with you my experience of communicating with the school board. I went to the school board in Ocean City first back in, I think it was an October meeting. And what happens is you only have 5 minutes during the public comments section. And they're not required to give any response or do anything. You can only have 5 minutes to speak, and then they can cut you off. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so that's what the school board looks like. They're wearing masks. They'll be wearing masks until March 7th. It's the only place in Ocean City that you have to wear a mask is inside the school buildings. And they've intentionally continued to hold these school board meetings there because they want to have everybody in there wearing masks, including the people who are going to speak. So you're standing back here facing this U of people. And I'm just telling you this in case any of you want to go to a school board meeting and challenge like I have. So just so you know, in Ocean City, and I'm sure it's in many places, if you want to get on city council, you have to have won an election to get in some other position. So many of the people in city council, if you look at their background, served on the school board at one time. So our last school board election, there were 11 people vying for 3 slots. And 2 of the people that won, I had been to the school board meetings, the 3 or 4 before that. I never saw them there. But they have names that their fathers are well-known realtors or business people in Ocean City, and so they won because of name recognition. In fact, I understood that they had there were many ballots that came in with only their names on them that were received before, at the very beginning of the election. So it made you think that probably the business tried to drum up some votes or something from people that they had done business with. But anyway, all that said, it's not. There's only a small minority of people on the school board who have parents in the school system. And up until, a year or 2 ago, nobody ever came to these meetings, and they're very boring. They only go through, here's what we're going to approve and not approve from all these requests from all these committees. So the last year or 2. So I went in there basically, and I'm going to just fly through this. And basically, next slide, please. Yeah, so I basically just tried to go in positively and thank them for their service and appreciate them. I've done that each time I've addressed them. And I've started with a question, and I say, do you represent the state of New Jersey, the governor, the legislators, the State Board of Education, or do you represent the parents of Ocean City and the voters that put you into office? And they just kind of looked at me. But I've said that from the very beginning to make a point, because they're implementing what's coming down from the state. But yet, that's not why we put them in office. We put them in office to represent us, represent our kids, represent the families, the parents, the voters. And so that's why it's been so challenging. And they don't feel like they can respond. So I started by saying, you probably know that I'm a pastor in town, but I want you to know I'm not trying to impose my values. I'm trying to keep the state of New Jersey from imposing their values in the teaching of our kids. And the overriding premise has not been I'm against this or against that. It's been I am very much supportive of parents having the authority over the upbringing and education of their children. That's what this is all about. So when you get to these teachings related to values and morals, the parents should have authority over those things. Our city should reject that implementation of that curriculum and basically leave it up to the parents to implement or teach what they want to. So my three requests have been from them at the beginning. What's the status of implementation of the curriculum related to gender identity and human sexuality? What's the status of it? Tell me what's been implemented already and what's going to be implemented by next fall. And I want that, so I said, don't even give it to me. Put it on your website so we can all know. And can you form a committee with some board members and the curriculum directors and get parents in there to help decide how this is implemented? Because my feeling is they should implement what is held true by the majority of the families and the parents and the voters in the district. I mean, why else do we have democracy and elections or representation? And so, but basically the governor got rid of home rule, which you probably have heard of, but that means like things like the wind turbines out in the ocean. Ocean City used to have a say in that kind of thing, but then the governor got rid of home rule, and so he has authority over those things at this point. This is the same thing. We don't have a home rule in our communities at this point because when the governor mandates something, he has full authority of it. So then I've also asked them to inform parents how to opt out and provide alternate instruction. And recently they did something on that, so I'll get to that. And then finally, after one of their meetings when they said, well, if you don't implement what the governor says, we're going to lose 10% of our funding. And somebody said, well, how much is that? And they said, well, between $5 and $5.5 million. And so I came out to the next meeting and I said, well, my background is I'm a CPA. I've served as a chief financial officer at some large organizations. I'm sure I could get some parents that we could come in and we could easily find a way to cut your budget by 10% by that $5 million so you wouldn't need that funding anymore. So, I was just trying to get bold. And I've said things at the end of my talks finally after getting frustrated. I said, so the parents expect you to stand up against this curriculum being forced on our community that's against the values of the majority of the parents and families in our community. Stand up and step up against it or step off the board. I've gotten so angry and frustrated and for the lack of response. So the next slide, please. Yeah, so they give you 5 minutes of public comments. After the first time I said these things and requested these things, I had 3 school board members endorse them during their board comments statement, 3 women who were courageous to say, board chair, we want you to implement these things. We want you to implement this committee. We want you to provide this content that he's asking for related to implementation of these things. And we want you to communicate to parents how they can opt out of it. That didn't happen. And in fact, shortly after that, you may have seen it in the Ocean City newspapers, these 3 women on the board, there were 4 women on the board of like 11 or 12. 3 of them filed a lawsuit against this chair and filed harassment charges against him because they felt like he was bullying them in these meetings and he and the superintendent were yelling at him. It just got ugly, and I realized how dysfunctional the school board was. And I realized, I guess, a recommendation to you, go to them once, but don't waste a lot of time there. Seriously. Superintendent had a public forum, and I mentioned there it got into the parents raging and debate with him and arguing, and he never did another one. He said he would, but he never did. And they still didn't do these things. If they basically then put the opt-out on their website. But I wanted them to email it out to all the parents. They haven't done that. It's hidden down, so you have to go through a link at the bottom that says like curriculum links, and the wording's in there now. If you want to opt out of sex ed, you can do it, but they don't seem willing to publicly communicate that to the parents and deal with the consequences. So I went to him last week, finally, at the new board chair, asked him to meet with me, and he did, but he just said the same things, and nothing new, really, other than that thing on the website. So instead, what I've done is, and I'm not a politician, but in Ocean City, it's clearly who you know, not what you know, and I happen to be in this position that God put me in at the Tabernacle. And the Tabernacle has a long, we were the founding organization of the city there even before the city was. And so the Tabernacle leader has some respect, and I happen to be in that role. So I feel like, whereas the Tabernacle, you may not know this, is responsible to be involved if there's ever a challenge to Ocean City selling alcohol and liquor in the town. Tabernacle has a requirement in our founding documents that we get involved in that fight. And I think, that was generations, more than a century ago. To me, this is the battle for this generation. This is the battle. So I found some community leaders who agree, because it's common sense. I mean, who wouldn't agree? But some conservative community leaders who are willing to put pressure on with me through the mayor on the school district and going that way. So that's, I guess, what I would recommend next week. One of those people arranged a meeting for me with the mayor to bring in ministers. Probably has to do with re-election for the mayor's race is coming up in some months. And but anyway, I'll take it, and just want to represent the Lord in that, and just do whatever it takes to help them to realize what the majority of the parents and community want. Now, if the majority of the parents weren't this way, I probably wouldn't feel so led to go down this fight. But in our society, where we're a democracy, and the majority of parents, I'm sure in Ocean City feel this way. In fact, I did a kind of a straw man poll online, and 2/3 of them felt this way. But the vocal minority also intimidates the rest of us to not get involved because they're going to call us names or whatever. Anyway, that said, another thing that's going on there is come on up. Sorry. Some other people fighting this battle, and some others have gone to Turning Point USA, which, who's heard of Charlie Kirk in here? Anybody? Yeah. So they've started actually tonight a course over in the library that is going to be on Zoom. You could find it if you Google it, but it's going to be biblical citizenship. So it started tonight. You missed tonight, obviously, but you could go catch it online, and then the next 8 weeks, it'll be on Zoom. Until that 8th week, it'll be back in the school library. Not the school library, the community center library at like 17th Street. And then after that, they want to do a public event in Ocean City, which I'm considering doing at the Tabernacle. They want to do it in a place, bring Charlie Kirk in, a place that has like 1,000 seats. And so we may or may not be doing that. I likely will be doing that. But anyway, so that's one thing I'm going to tell the mayor is that, I'm hoping you will proactively address this, take on what I see the majority of parents wanting you to do, and get involved in this. And at the minimum, go to the school district and say, this isn't a financial issue. Ocean City can do a tax rate hike of half a penny and cover that $5 million. And at least let the school district know that, take it out of being a financial issue, and others will put pressure on those involved. So that's kind of what I've learned. So I guess I'm asking you to consider learning from my mistakes if you take this on, but I think it's a cause worth taking on if you feel so compelled like I did by the Lord to get involved with it. So for this Turning Point thing, I left some of these cards out on that table out there where the flowers are, and help yourself and participate in that if you want to. And then also a couple of quick things. I mentioned the OC&J School Discussion 2021-22 Facebook group, and then there's another one called Team PYC, Protect Your Children, that's going across New Jersey, and they're trying to, by county, develop strategic plans to address these issues by county. So that's another one, Team PYC. And then Family Policy Alliance, I can't say enough about them. Started by Focus on the Family and James Dobson. I guess probably a few decades ago, but just really value Sean and that ministry as well. So thank you all.
At this time, I know we're trying to stay close to 8:30 so that way we can get you guys home. But we're going to take about like 10 or 15, 20 minutes to do some Q&A.
The question was, have we done any research on the CRT, or the critical race theory that they're working on too? So, I mean, critical race theory at the university academic level, probably not taught in public schools, but the sense of the concepts and the terms might be taught in some public schools. Now, there is a law introduced by Senator Mike Testa down from this area and Senator Joe Panaccio up in Northwest Jersey to ban the teaching of CRT in the Jersey public schools. They introduced it, a few months ago before the end of the session, reintroduced it last month when the session started again. So that is sitting in the legislature. Again, be a heavy lift for the Education Committee in the legislature to hear it and approve it, because Senator Testa is in the minority in that battle in Trenton. But they have introduced a bill to address this in the state of New Jersey to make sure it's not happening. So that's one of the things I brought up a little early, and I thank you for kind of reinserting that. The library in the public school. So though you may not see lessons or you may not see certain books being brought home, don't think there's not material in the library that's accessible to students that does also push ideologies, whether it's CRT or other sexual ideologies, above and beyond what's being taught in the classroom. So you may look for curriculum or lesson plans so you know what's being taught by the teacher. It doesn't mean that's the comprehensive view of everything your child is being exposed to because of the public school library. I know in the county library system, you can go there yourself or go online to the catalog and find what's available, but who knows what's in the public school libraries. So we are working on a bill right now, again, with legislators on Thursday, to draft a bill that would require school districts to list publicly all the books that are available in the public school library by age, so you know what your children might be or their peers might be accessing at that level. So thank you for kind of bringing it up. In the library is a whole nother level of information that goes above and beyond the classroom material. Another good point, so stuff happens in the legislature. He was kind of sharing his experience of not knowing these bills were even being passed till way after the fact. So the lessons in kindergarten being mandated, that was approved in January of last year by the Senate, and then Governor Murphy signed into law on March 1st of last year to start this current school year. And so oftentimes you don't even hear the stuff going on in the media. You have to kind of, I guess, hopefully be on the email list, familypolicyalliance.com/New Jersey, and you'll hear this stuff on our weekly email blast.
Yeah, so I also wanted to mention another issue that I've seen in those 8th grade learning standards. So, by ages 12, 13, 11, 12, 13, this just blew me away. Pregnancy options. So options if you get pregnant, and this is for 11, 12, 13-year-olds. Pregnancy options include birth and adoption, but they also include abortion. So they're putting out there's an option at those ages. So basically, a kid's hearing that from their teacher, and they're thinking, oh, they're advocating for abortion as an option. And these other things that we talked about, whether the school teacher's coming off as advocating for those or normalizing them at least, like this is all normal behavior, just unbelievable. Yeah, so it's actually, they use the term opt-out. That may not be the best term. I've heard others say you're actually seeking alternate instruction because you're still required to take like courses. And one of the reasons Ocean City gave me that they're not really promoting that yet is because they don't want kids to be embarrassed and bullied by ended up walking out of the class at that time or something like that. But in the meantime, when they bring up these things that they are talking about, these topics I mentioned, the kids are laughing and they're mocking and they're like, this stuff's ridiculous, So it's kind of like, it doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, another answer for that one?
Well, yeah, I think you're spot on. So they have to give an alternative instruction. So they still have some sort of lesson ready to go for kids who are not going to take these health class lessons. So if they just get stuck in the principal's office for 30 minutes, it's actually a violation of what they're supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be put into study hall for 30 minutes either, just to sit there and doodle. The school should have alternative lessons ready for students to do something else in place of these lessons in health class to fulfill their grade and to meet a certain learning standard. Again, each school will be different on what those lessons look like, but you should ask them what they are and as the alternative for them to learn this.
I would suggest gathering a group of people so that it's not the teachers just doing this for one person. There'll be enough people that want to honor this instruction for these things out there. If you're in your Facebook friends with other parents and you go as a group, then they've got to provide something more reasonable and be prepared with something that's really quality education.
So the last time when I went and saw this at the Ocean City Tabernacle, like I said, I was fired up and I was ready to go. But there was a little piece of me that was like, okay, but what can I do? I'm the children's director here at Mission Point, and Susie and I have met several times, and Misty and and we just I kind of came together with a couple of the children's directors from Wellsprings and Friendship Bible and Fresh Start and Fusion. There's a couple of children's leaders here tonight with us. And we just decided, like, we have to do something even in our own churches. And so one of the things that I want to encourage you guys to do is we started teaching apologetics to our kids here at Mission Point. So if you guys can get your hands on the books like Case for Creator, Case for Christ, these are all really great tools for you to teach your kids at home. Because if they know what they know, and they know it is the truth, they'll be able to stand a lot stronger than if they just don't know. So if you guys can even help us start doing that, that would be huge. The other thing is that I wanted you guys to be able to stand together. So those little slips of paper that you guys received when you first came in, what it is all it is a simple, you drop it off at one of the tables. Each of them are marked by city. They're all around the room. And when there is a Board of Education meeting and they are voting on something that has to do with this subject, you will get one text that says, Board of Education meeting tonight, this is what's on the docket. And then you can choose to go, and that way you know you're not the only one there. And that way you guys all can come in and be committed together. Because especially like in EHT, it's such a big town. It's hard to fight by yourselves. So I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to be able to fight together on this stuff. The last thing that I want to make sure that you guys know is that we're not done. We have decided to hold a whole symposium. And our next one will be at Wellsprings, and I think we're talking May-ish, we were talking. And we're actually going to have it where we teach you to have healthy conversations with your kids. Because now that they're getting this information, how do you deal with it when they come home? How do you have good, healthy conversations? And then in August, we're going to host one more, and it's going to be able to teach you how to have great conversations with your teachers and build those relationships. But then on top of that, we want our teachers to come so we can love on them and let them know that we're standing with them. So if they don't feel, or they feel convicted that they're not ready to teach this, we're here for them. And we want them to know we're also standing behind them. So you will also get that text. But that's it, I promise, nothing else. So I just wanted to let you know, there's resources here. Their websites are all really great. I'm going to be posting them on our website and on our Facebook pages. I believe Wellsprings is going to do that stuff too. And then just be watching our Facebook page and our website, and we'll be posting this meeting. So can we all say thank you and give them a hand of... All right, well, that's all we have for this evening. If you want to help yourselves to coffee, and we hope to see you at our next meeting. Thanks.